I'll never forget the time me and my brother snuck out past our bedtimes to explore an allegedly haunted house down the block. Yes, I said bedtime, as I was only 10 and my brother Luke was only 12. When our parents said goodnight to us, I went to Luke's room and we took a couple hand-powered flashlights with us and hopped outside through the window. Luckily, his room was on the first floor. Those hand-powered flashlights worked by constantly pushing in a little trigger that would create light inside the lens. They were noisy as hell, but they were convenient. Once we were outside, we just walked down the block, and in 2 minutes we were there. It was rumored by all the neighborhood kids and teens that the place was haunted. Everything about it was creepy. The older, more antique design of the house, the isolation from the rest of the houses, and the broken windows and rotting wood. It seemed perfect for a horror movie. We went around to the backyard. This was all my curious and confident brother's idea. I was scared shitless. The door was locked, as expected. I felt a bit of relief, thinking we might just go home, but my brother made a shocking move next. He grabbed a plank of wood laying in the grass and began smashing the already chipped window. Eventually there was enough of an opening to unlock it and slide it up completely. We hopped inside and began cranking those noisy-ass flashlights. Immediately after entering the house, we both picked up on the fact that it was like 90 degrees in there, which was odd as it was a September night in the mid-70s. There was no graffiti or anything anywhere. In fact, it was relatively empty besides a few pieces of furniture that were clearly not worth taking along. It seemed we were the first to enter the house, shockingly, or at least from the back. We went upstairs to the main floor from the little den area and continued cranking the flashlights. That's when we heard the slightest crack in the floorboards from right above us. We both jumped. I tugged for Luke to leave, but he told me the place is old as hell, it's just house noises. I stopped cranking the flashlight at this point, and I urged Luke to do the same, but he only called me stupid for suggesting something so ridiculous. Then there was another crack in the floorboards from above us. He began walking upstairs. I didn't want to go up there, but I was not about to stay down there alone. I followed behind him to the upstairs. There was a door that led to a room right above where we were standing. I begged him not to open it, but he must have just wanted to be the big, tough older brother. He began to reach for the doorknob while still cranking the noisy flashlight, but then he stopped. I was confused. I could see in the dark he was moving his ear up against the door, listening for something. Silence. Then, the most deafening, nightmare-inducing moment of my life. A single bang on the door from the other side sent my brother staggering into the wall in pain, covering his ear. We dropped the flashlights and ran straight out the back door and back home. We were so loud when we got back that our parents found us out. We told them what happened, but they naturally didn't care and grounded us both for a week. 2 nights later, I woke to the sound of something from outside my window and a glare of brightness sneaking in through my slightly opened blind. I sat up, and my heart sank when I realized it was the sound of the crank to my flashlight. I stood up and looked out the window, and that's when it stopped. There was nothing but complete blackness out there after that. I woke the next day barely remembering what happened, and I still hope today that that part was just a dream. This is a story that happened to me recently. I was still in my first year of university, and I've only just made friends with a few other students. Albeit an old and notorious university for its ghostly figures and paranormal activity, the campus janitors and security were all too familiar with unusual reports. The art and design faculty was subjected to the oldest campus of the 4 separate buildings, and the block my class happened to progress in was the allegedly haunted section as well. It was late in the afternoon, just before 5, and my friend needed to use the restroom. She asked me to accompany her, and I obliged, seeing it as an opportunity to rest my eyes from the strains of the projector. She rushed into one of the stalls, and I waited outside the bathroom. Feeling that she would take longer than I initially anticipated, I decided to walk back to class without telling her. As soon as I sat down, she barged into the class calling out for me. According to her claim, she heard the sink's tap turn on and thought it was me playing a prank. As she opened the door, she saw no one else in the restroom besides herself, yet the other stall next to her was locked from the inside. Thinking it was someone else on the toilet, she asked if it was me. No answer. Curious, she looked down the gap but saw no shoes or legs, yet heard feminine whispers and humming from that particular stall. Frightened, she left without saying another word. Class ended and we went home, but the thought of the occurrence remained. We later learned from one of the janitors that no one should ever be in the restroom after 5 in the evening, as there is a known ghost of a woman who resides in the stalls. Needless to say, as juniors in the university, my friends and I decided to never use the bathrooms after the designated time. I'm not in any way saying these claims are true, but everything I told you is true in regards to what I was told. Whether these things I was told by my friend and the janitor are true or not remains a mystery to me. This happened a few months ago while I was serving in Japan as a missionary for the Mormon Church. I was in the country for 2 years, and my time to return home was approaching. I was in my last area, Kyoto, a bustling tourist attraction, an ancient Japanese city I've wanted to visit all my life. Anyway, it was late at night, and my companion and I were knocking on doors to see if anyone had interest in learning about Christ. We came across this one apartment building and decided to give it a shot. In Japan, there are 3 kinds of apartments: super luxurious suites, decent apartments with 4 to 5 rooms total, or ghetto as crap. This apartment was the latter. We were on the 2nd floor of this building and knocked on this one door. A middle-aged man in worn-out clothes answered with an awkward smile on his face. Being the kind missionaries we were, we introduced ourselves and asked him if he would like to learn about what we believe. Instead of giving us a direct answer, he invited us in. Usually, in missionary work, this is a good sign, but upon stepping foot into that apartment, I knew what we got ourselves into. This apartment reeked with the smell of marijuana and urine. His apartment was puny: a small entryway, a door on the left leading into a bathroom, a small kitchen to the right, and a small multi-purpose room with a small kneeling table, TV, and bed. That's it. Judging by the way he was behaving and most of the decor in his apartment, I knew this guy definitely had some sins worth confessing. He sat us down on either side of the table and started to rant on about how he hates Christians and wants to kill them. That made my companion and I tense up a bit. But the man was plastered. In the time this was going on, he drank like 10 times his weight in booze. We just prayed and hoped he wouldn't recognize who we were and what he was telling us. Then he said, "I'm going to tell you a secret and you can't tell anyone." He then pulled out from under his bed a box. He opened it to reveal thousands and thousands of dollars worth of Japanese yen, and yes, it was authentic. We even examined it. This man was an illegal drug lord who worked with the Yakuza, the Japanese mafia group. We then realized that if this man knew what he just did and showed us, he would kill us for sure, or at least take us hostage. My companion and I feared for our lives and tried to come up with an excuse to get away, but he wouldn't let us go. He kept ranting on about irrelevant things and saying how Christianity was an evil cult of some kind. We tried to explain our side of the story, but there's no use in reasoning with a drunk drug lord who works for the Japanese mafia. It then got to the point where we practically had to run for the door. We said we were leaving, stood up, and quickly walked over to the door. The guy then stood up and began to reach for something in a box, but we never saw what it was. As soon as the door closed, we bolted home, faster than we ever had. The last thing we wanted was him sobering up to find out he had revealed his deepest, darkest secrets to 2 Christian missionaries from America. Had this man not been drunk, he probably would have killed us. For all we know, he was reaching for a gun as we were leaving. When I was 15 years old, I was home alone one night for whatever reason. My bedroom was on the first floor, right next to the living room. It's a strange setup. I had the door shut and was playing video games when I heard a strange sound come out from in the living room. It took me a few moments to figure out that it was a tap on the window. I stepped through the dark living room and out the front door and checked the bushes by the window. Nobody was there. I went back to my room with the door open and resumed playing the game. 5 seconds later, another knock on the glass. This time I ran to the front door barefoot, ready to chase the pranksters, but again, no one was in the bushes. No one was even in sight. I chose to just ignore it from here on out. On my way back to my room, there was another knock. I ran over to the window to try and catch them. There wasn't anyone outside, but I felt something right above the tip of my toes. I looked down and saw the dark shadow of a figure sitting down by the window. I think I was back in my room in a matter of 2 seconds with the door locked. I was hiding under my bed trying to call my dad. The knocking on the glass continued from outside. When I explained to my dad, he called me crazy for not calling the police, so he told me he would for me and to wait in my room with the door locked. I'd say about 5 minutes later, the knocking stopped, and 10 minutes later, the cops arrived. The figure was gone, but there were no signs of entry or exit, as all the doors were locked and all the windows shut. Still, we haven't seen or heard of anything since then, but it's still creepy as hell to think about.
Well, you guys obviously liked the last McDonald's stories video I did, so I'm doing another one. Like I mentioned in the last McDonald's video I did, these stories aren't the type to make you sit in your room absolutely terrified. However, they are extremely creepy and odd. Anyways, let's begin. It was about 3 in the morning and I was on my way to my job at my local McDonald's to open with one of my favorite managers there with me. She told me to text her when I got there so that she could let me inside. Once I pulled in, I noticed a man standing outside of his car in the farthest corner of the parking lot. He was shooting me this sort of menacing stare. Let me point out that it's completely pouring outside. I was really confused as to why this guy wasn't just sitting in his car. I then parked and texted my manager to let me inside. Seconds later, I noticed her at the door opening it for me. Upon walking up to her, I say my usual good morning. I was stopped mid-sentence by her rushing me inside and saying, "Did you see that guy outside?" I told her yes, and she proceeded to help me refill sauces, napkins, and things like that. My manager then told me that she's going to check the security tapes just to make sure that everything during the period that the restaurant was closed was okay. Minutes later, my manager called me into her office for whatever reason. She told me to look at the screen and it showed that the same man was standing outside. The time was 12:47. She then fast-forwarded the tape to reveal that the man had been standing outside the entire time up until now. And at this point, it's about 3:50 a.m. I ran to the front lobby and I noticed him still standing over by his car. I figured or was hoping that he was probably just on something and he was waiting for us to open so that maybe he could get breakfast. I resumed filling sauces again and making sure everything was in working order, until I was abruptly interrupted by banging at the front door. I walked over and noticed a figure right outside the front door. It was the man. I yelled that we were closed and that he would have to come back later. That didn't seem to faze him as he continued to bang on the door. I walked away, figuring that he was just being an asshole, when suddenly I heard a loud crash. I ran to the lobby to see the glass door broken and the man beginning to step inside. I yelled for my manager and told her that we needed to leave through the back door. And we did just that. We booked it to our cars and both called the cops. They arrived in about 15 minutes and came outside the restaurant with a dirty-looking man in cuffs. They said he was hiding in the back janitor's closet with a large knife in his hand. So that's my story, and also the reason I'm never working early mornings again. I've been working at McDonald's now for over 5 years, and this is still my creepiest experience there. This happened 2 years ago when I was 18 and I had been working my first overnight shift on front counter. I usually work in the kitchen on overnights, so I had no interactions with any of the customers until then. I was working from 10 p.m. until 6 a.m., which is a usual overnight shift for us. Around 3 a.m., I was making some fries when I noticed a man standing there and trying to take pictures with his cell phone of me and my other female coworker, Rebecca. I pointed it out to her and she just rolled her eyes in annoyance and went to take an order on drive-thru, telling me it happened a lot from people. I was instantly uncomfortable. I wanted to tell the manager, but he was in the office doing his manager stuff and I really didn't want to bother him. I went over with what felt like a nervous smile and quickly did my usual greeting. "Hi, what can I get for you?" He just kinda looked at me and stayed quiet. He was about 5'8", white, early 20s, medium build with dark hair and brown eyes. An average man, I would say, but something about his piercing glare made me feel super uncomfortable. Then he smiled a smile that sent shivers down my spine. "I'll just have a coffee black, sweetie," he said, and I could instantly smell the alcohol on his breath. I nodded and told him the price before he pulled out a $5 bill and went to hand it to me, making sure our hands touched. I avoided his gaze and went to hand back his change when he winked and went to go wait for the coffee. I went to go make it as fast as I could, but just my luck, we were out of coffee on both the front counter and the drive-thru, as we don't sell much through the night. I turned around and kept as little eye contact as I could. "I'm sorry, I'm going to have to brew you a fresh pot. Should only take about 3 minutes." "Don't worry, I don't mind. I have quite the view while I wait," he replied, shooting me a wink, and I just smiled awkwardly and looked away. I had to make sure I didn't fall behind on my shift, so I began to set up the muffins on the display so that we had them all ready for breakfast, which in Canada starts at 4 a.m. "So, Susan," I heard from behind me, realizing it was the guy. I instantly tensed, wondering how he knew my name before I noticed I had my name tag on and quietly cursed to myself. I turned around and looked at him and he said, "So, what time are you stuck here until tonight, beautiful?" I instantly panicked, as I don't do well in situations like this. 7. I said nervously, which then the guy gave me a huge grin. "Oh, so you still have time before you're off, eh?" I nodded and noticed the coffee was done pouring, so I went over and made his coffee as he watched me with an intense stare. I handed it to him before saying "have a nice night," earning me another wink. He then waved and said as he turned around, "I'll see you later, Susan." I watched as he walked out the door and tried to calm myself down. He doesn't actually know when I'm off, so I was okay, I thought to myself. 6 a.m. rolled around and it was finally time to go. I still felt a little paranoid about the guy, but knew it was now in the past. My coworker Chris was going to drop me off at home as we carpooled, so we got our stuff together and we left. As we were heading to his car, I noticed a parked car with someone in it. And, of course, it was the guy. I panicked and quickly told Chris that that was the guy, as I had told him what had happened not long ago. He instantly brought me into his coat and did his best to keep me hidden as we walked to his car. He made sure no one followed the car, dropped me off, and watched as I went inside, telling me to stay safe. I thanked him before going into my house and going to bed. The next day, I went into work and got asked by my manager how I got home. I told them that Chris gave me a ride home. My manager got this confused look and said something that made my blood run cold. Oh, that's strange because some guy was here looking for you just before 7. He said he was there to pick you up. I thought before that the man's intentions weren't good. Just the way he looked at me and spoke to me like I was prey. And this pretty much confirmed it. Since then, I have refused to work front counter overnight shifts, and we no longer wear our name tags on overnight shifts. This may not be the scariest or most action-packed story ever, but this is seriously one of the creepiest encounters both me and my friend have ever had. So, me and my friends had just seen the new Leonardo DiCaprio movie, The Revenant, a film he deserves an Oscar for, I'd like to add. Anyway, once the movie had finished, my friends Owen and Samuel decided they weren't hungry and then headed home. Now it was only me and my other friend Jake left. We decided to hit the town and get something to eat for dinner. We looked in a few shops on the way, but we weren't really that interested in buying anything. We eventually decided to go to McDonald's. Yes, I know, it's not the best thing to have for dinner, but we were 14 and we weren't fussed about going to a bigger place to eat. After what felt like a lifetime walking down the town, we got to the McDonald's. We went to the bigger 2-story McDonald's as we were in the city center of Edinburgh and everywhere else was busy. Anyway, me and Jake took our food up to the 2nd floor as the 1st floor was pretty filled up. We sat down in a little section that had about 4 or 5 tables in it, only one of which was available. So we sat down at the free table and began to eat. I had just taken a bite out of my food when I looked up and noticed that an old woman sitting alone at the table behind us was staring at me. I dismissed it at first and thought maybe she was looking at the wall behind me. I didn't think much of it. I mean, who would, right? I have a tendency to look around the room I'm in when I'm eating, so my eyes did occasionally look past the woman. When my eyes did pass the woman, however, she, yes, you guessed it, was still staring at me. I didn't know whether or not I should tell Jake about it at this point. He was facing me, so he couldn't see her, and I also thought I was being paranoid at first. But at this point, red flags were now definitely going off in my head. The woman didn't even have anything in front of her to eat. There was just a coffee cup on her tray, which was clearly empty. She was wearing a bright pink jacket and had a big stain on the right shoulder and dark blue glasses that made her eyes look huge. A few minutes passed and she was still staring at me. But now her eyes were as wide as physically possible, so it's fair to say at this point she was glaring at me. I don't even think she was blinking either, which was really adding to the things that were off about this woman. I tried my best not to lock eyes with her, but it was quite difficult. After another 2 minutes of the woman staring directly at me, I decided that it was time to tell Jake what was going on, because I was starting to feel uneasy and he was picking up on it. I didn't want her to hear me speaking as our tables were relatively close to each other, so I picked up my phone and texted Jake what was happening. He tried to turn around, making it look like he was just looking around. He noticed her as well, and we tried laughing it off, which was working until things got a little weirder. The woman started talking to herself, glaring at me still. From this point on, when I looked in her direction, she would raise her hands to her face and start aggressively whispering to them. And she was spitting everywhere, and when I looked away from her, she dropped her hands back onto her lap and began glaring again, still occasionally saying things to herself. Neither me or Jake could make out what she was saying, but I'm pretty sure I heard her say she was speaking to someone called John. The stares, glares, and whatever you want to call it continued and continued. By this point, I could barely focus on eating, and neither could Jake. Now thinking about it, I think she was done with her drink before we even sat down, so why stay so long? She started getting louder with her conversation, but everyone at the tables around us were oblivious to what was happening. The seconds that passed felt like minutes now, and she was practically yelling things to herself. When she did, I made clear eye contact with her after this, and I swear she said something directly to me in an aggressive whisper, but it was too quiet to make out. I think she said something along the lines of, "You mutt," at the end of her sentence. Me and Jake decided to wait this out and just sit until she left. We had long finished our food by this point. Unless she was whispering to her hands, she was still glaring at me, now with a horrifying grin which made my skin crawl. Is this woman crazy? Or is she just a really socially awkward freak that liked to stare at boys eating? The woman eventually got up. On her way out, she violently threw her handbag at the floor, yelled something at the top of her voice at it, picked it up intensely, and stormed down the stairs out of sight. I had no idea what had just happened, but her face definitely sent shivers down my spine, and her behavior was beyond abnormal. Me and Jake sat there for another few minutes to make sure she had definitely left and not gone to the bathroom or something. Then we practically legged it out of there and we never saw her again. Like I said, not an action-packed story, but just imagine if all of this had happened to you. It would definitely creep you out and make you feel uncomfortable. It certainly made me feel uneasy anyway. Since then, I have never gone to that particular McDonald's at night again. I remember working the night shift the other night at a local McDonald's. I had to fill in for my friend Kiara, who called in sick. This night was probably one of the most terrifying nights I have ever worked. It was dead around 11 p.m. and I was asked by the manager to sweep the floors until a customer came in. One customer came in and he looked a bit rough. Bald, long rusty beard, glasses, sandals, and just clothes that had stains on them. I go over to the register and say, "Hi, can I get you anything?" He then said, "Yes, can I have a large coffee, please?" I take his order, give him his coffee, and tell him to have a wonderful night. He smiles. I go to sweep the floor again, and I see the man is sitting a bit close to where I would be sweeping, which is usually under the tables and just around the floor. When I reached his table, he says, "You're very beautiful." I smile and say, "Thank you very much." He says, "Can I give you a ride home when you get off work?" I say no thank you and that I have a ride home. He went from the nice man that I had took the order from to just pure rude. He asks me, "What's your schedule?" I tell him that I'm not allowed to give that information out, sorry. He takes his coffee and goes back outside. The next night after that, Kiara and I worked together with my other guy friend, Jack. I told Kiara about the guy from the night before and she gave me this weird facial expression. Jack comes over to me and says, "Hey, is everything okay?" I tell him about the guy from the night before and he gave me a look of terror. What he said to me ran chills down my spine. "That man called the restaurant earlier and asked about you." Just then, my blood ran cold as I saw the man walk back into the restaurant. Kiara's face went pale and Jack's jaw was dropped. My stomach turned in knots as I said, "Hi, can I get you anything tonight?" He says, "No, but can I take you home?" Jack steps out and says, "No, she ain't going anywhere with you. Get out of here before I call the cops." The manager got pissed off at Jack for leaving his position at the drive-thru window while Kiara was frying burgers. Jack agreed to switch positions with me until the morning crew came in. The manager asked me to take the trash outside, and I nervously said okay. Jack, on the other hand, was pissed that the manager even asked me to do that. Jack was nice enough to take it out for me. I stayed inside while Jack took out the trash. Jack comes back in and pulls me to the janitor's closet and says, "That guy was waiting for you in his truck with 5 other big guys in there." I felt sick to my stomach when he said that. Jack informs the manager, and the manager, like the asshole that she was, says, "He's not gonna hurt anyone. He's harmless. Get back to work." The next morning, me and Jack worked together, and my other coworker Taylor informed me that the man had came back and told her my schedule, and that he'll wait for me to come back in today. Eventually, he came in. Jack, being the good friend that he was, told him to get the hell out of the restaurant and to never come back again or else he would call the cops. Jack lost his job because of this, but to me he was just looking out for me. I cried so hard when Jack lost his job because I know Kiara and I would be working alone without anyone else there to protect us. But I never saw the man again after that. I quit my job at McDonald's and so did Kiara. Me, Jack, and Kiara now live in the same apartment building and work at a grocery store. I don't know what could have happened to me if I took out the trash that night and not Jack. Subscriber stories video soon. I'm just waiting on really good stories, so if you have any, please send them in. Thanks for watching.
Number 1. I used to be a corrections officer. At my jail, we had a non-violent criminal in lockdown. He'd been put with a violent one. The bad dude killed the other guy with a coloring pencil, put it straight through his eyeball. I was working the female facility, so I only heard all of the chatter over the radio. Speaking of eyeballs, we also had a guy pull his own one out. The worst thing I dealt with, though, were the stories when I was talking to my girls. There was this one girl that none of the other COs could stand. Let's call her Jess. She was constantly in trouble and getting put into lockdown. I had a very good rapport with her, though, and occasionally she'd open up to me. I came in one day, and Jess was in a cell acting out. It turns out that her aunt, who was in the same facility, had just been sentenced to death. This woman, Margaret Allen, in case anyone's interested in looking this up, had killed a woman by cutting her throat and pouring bleach into it, as well as into her mouth. Then she buried her alive. Anyway, Jess was upset by this, and even I was like, look, that fucking bitch deserves death. You need to behave and not get into any more trouble or lose sleep over this. So she proceeded to tell me why she loved her so much. As a kid, around 6, Jess was in an apartment with a few other little cousins when some guy broke in to kill her parents. They were cooking crack at the time. Her 10-year-old cousin shoos all of the kids into a closet and tells them to keep quiet. Jess's best friend, the same age as her, hears screaming and runs out. She's also shot dead. The oldest kid wasn't able to stop her. Long story short, this aunt who had just been sentenced to death took her and all of the other kids in, kind of raised them on and off, and always made sure they were taken care of. They all lived in the same apartment complex. Those of us who aren't raised in such poverty and violence have no idea how bad kids in this country fucking have it. Number 2. 2 months after my brother and his wife bought a new house, they had to go out of town and needed their cats fed. Their house and my office are both a good drive from my apartment, but only a few minutes from each other. My brother said if I wanted, I could just stay over in the guest room rather than driving among the 3 places. So I got the keys and instructions and planned to stay there for 3 nights: Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. Monday evening was uneventful until around midnight. I was lying on the living room couch watching Conan, with a cat lying on my chest. I started to drift off to sleep. The next thing I knew, I was standing in pitch black darkness. I completely freaked out. I had no idea where I was. I felt around in the dark and felt nothing. Finally, I realized there actually was a faint blue light coming from above. I moved towards it, and then understood where I was. I was in the fucking basement. The light was coming through the basement door at the top of the stairs, which leads into the kitchen. Just enough moonlight apparently made it through from a window elsewhere in the kitchen. I bolted up the stairs, turned on the kitchen light, and closed the basement door. I was terrified until I calmed myself down enough to come to the conclusion you probably already came to. I had sleepwalked all the way down the stairs after opening the basement door, which I know was closed. A couple of things are important to this story. First, the basement. The house was very nice. Actually, more than they should have been able to afford. The only exception was the basement. I'd only seen the basement once when I'd first got the tour. It was totally unfinished, and was the one major thing they wanted to fix up. All they had down there were boxes and the washer-dryer. I had no reason to want to go down there, and had kind of forgotten it even existed. The other point is that sleepwalking is kind of a thing in my family, almost an inside joke. My brother talked in his sleep constantly, and would sleepwalk sometimes. It always scared the hell out of me. The idea of people doing things in their sleep just creeps me out to the core. Still does. My brother knew this and would tease me about it, so it was known in my family that I had this phobia. But as far as I know, I had never, ever sleepwalked until that night. The image kept playing in my mind over and over of me asleep, getting up from the couch, walking to the kitchen, opening up the basement door, and shuffling down the stairs in total darkness. Creepy as all hell. Anyway, I saw the TV was still on in the living room, playing The Wedding Crashers. I watched the rest of the movie, trying to laugh and think of the sleepwalking as a funny story to tell my brother. When I went upstairs to go to sleep in the guest room, I stayed asleep. That was night 1. The next morning, in the light of day, it didn't seem that scary. I texted my brother about it and joked around. All day, I wasn't bothered one bit, but as I'm walking out of my office to my car, I'm overcome by this sense of dread. All of a sudden, the thought of going to sleep in that house, and maybe sleepwalking again, is scaring the hell out of me. So I had a plan. I stop at the hardware store and pick up one of those rubber door stopper wedges. At the house, I jam this into the crack under the basement door and kick it until it's as far as it can go. I test it out, trying to open the door, and it won't budge. Perfect. Later, I go upstairs and fall asleep. When I wake up, I swear to God I think I'm dreaming. I was standing in darkness again, but this time I know exactly where I am. The smell is the same. The concrete floor under my feet is the same. I look around for the light from upstairs, and it takes me longer to find it because it's farther away. Last night I was only a couple of feet from the stairs. This night it was maybe 10 feet. I run up and turn on the kitchen lights. I see the rubber wedge on the floor, a couple of feet away, as if it was tossed there. Again, I can't stop picturing myself sleepwalking. Out of the bedroom, down the stairs, trying to open the basement door, bending down and yanking out the wedge, and then, again, slowly down into the darkness. I decided I was turning on the basement lights, and they were staying on. I opened the door and flipped the switch to the basement stairway. I saw there was a main switch at the bottom of the stairs. To give you a quick sense of the layout, the staircase splits the basement into two parts. To the right is a small area with the washer-dryer, and to the left is the big open area. I walked down and turned on the lights for the whole basement. That's when I noticed something I hadn't when my brother gave me the tour. About 10 to 15 feet away, in the big area, there was a door to what looked like a small closet. This door was closed, but had no doorknob, just an empty hole, so it looked like it would freely swing open. I realized it was very close to where I had just awoken. Then a fucking freaky thought came to me. It was as if each night I was heading to the door and getting a little farther each time before I woke up. As soon as that thought popped into my head, I booked it up the stairs again, left the lights on, and closed the door. I went up to the bedroom, but it took me forever to fall asleep. That was night 2. The next morning, Wednesday morning, I woke up late for work. I didn't think about the basement at all because I was scrambling to get ready. At work though, I was still curious about what was behind the door, so I texted my brother and asked. He replied, "Wait, why were you in the basement?" I realized that when I texted him the day before, I never actually told him where I woke up, so I'd tell him I woke up in the basement, actually twice in a row. After a while, he sends this novel-length text. It was about how the basement is creepy and not to go down there, etc. How they tried putting the litter boxes in the basement and the cats made a mess in the house because they refused to go down there. How he volunteers to do every chore other than the laundry, just so he doesn't have to go down there. He says all this stuff, and it's surprising to me, because my brother never believed in the paranormal or superstitions, not even when we were kids. I also realize he never answered my question about the door, but I let it go. After work, I get the same feeling of dread as I'm walking to my car. I really don't want to stay there again, and I decide, fuck it, I don't have to. So I go and feed the cats, get my stuff, and drive back to my place. I'm supposed to feed the cats one more time, so I'll stop over in the morning. As I went to sleep at my apartment, I was thinking of all the steps I'd have to take to sleepwalk to the basement again. Find my car parked around the block, drive asleep to my brother's house, etc. But this time I sleep through the night. That was night 3. Thursday morning, I stop at the house as planned. I'm about to leave when I remember that the basement lights are still on. I don't even hesitate to go down there and turn them off. There was something about being there in the morning that, at the time, made it seem fine. When I go down, again, that door without a doorknob catches my eye, and it doesn't even seem scary anymore. So, what the hell, let's see. I walk over to it, and I distinctly remember not feeling spooked at all. That is, until I reach my hand towards the doorknob hole to pull it open. As soon as I do that, and I mean instantly, I feel this electric feeling, like the air before a storm, and I imagine a hand coming through the hole and grabbing mine. It was like 0 to 60, going from no fear to being certain something horrible would happen if I opened the door. It's hard to describe it other than that electric feeling. I booked it up the stairs and out of the house. So, a month later, I meet my brother for happy hour. A few drinks in, we start joking about me sleepwalking and the creepy basement. I say he never answered me about what was behind the door, and he says I don't want to know. joking at first, but then, as I persist, he gets more serious, insisting that I really don't want to know. Finally, he tells me, and I don't believe him. He's my big brother, and he's only bullshitted me a million times in the past. This was his explanation. The previous and first owners of the house had a teen daughter that used the basement as her bedroom. The door was to her closet, where one night she curled up, took some pills, and killed herself. The family was going to remodel the basement, but after tearing it apart, realized they couldn't do it and had to move. That was why only the basement was unfinished, and why my brother was able to afford the place. The seller had to disclose a suicide happened in the residence. He said if I didn't believe him, to look up the market values of the identical houses in his tract. I know how much they paid for their house, and it was way lower. He and his wife considered themselves rational people, and figured it was a bargain, but they still didn't want to tell anyone. After they moved in, his wife was fine with the basement, but he grew to hate it. He apologized for not saying anything to me before I stayed there, but he never thought I'd have any reason to go down there. Now, here's what convinced me. I said, okay, the only thing that makes me kind of believe you is that last morning I was there, and I went over to the closet door. At this point, I see my brother's face change. I continued. When I went over to it, the air felt like, and at that same instant, I say, electricity, and my brother says, electric, at the same exact time. I saw his face and knew he was telling the truth. I've never stepped foot again in that basement, and I haven't sleepwalked since. Number 3. I was at a party at my friend Brian's house. I was really uncomfortable because I didn't really know anyone there, and I knew that all of Brian's friends were really into drugs. I wound up just watching movies and drinking mixed drinks until I fell asleep in a chair. The next morning, I was getting a glass of water and getting ready to leave when one of Brian's friends approached me. He asked me if Brian and I had hooked up during the night because he had heard so much noise coming from his bedroom. I said no, and he continued to tease me about it. He was being creepy and insulting, so I left. Later that morning, I found out that Brian had overdosed and died during the night. His friend had heard Brian moaning and thrashing around and thought that he was having sex. Number 4. So about 3 years ago during summer, I had a habit of staying up late playing games with my window open. This usually wasn't a problem since my neighborhood was quiet. However, one night, someone knocked on my window around midnight. When I went over to investigate, I heard someone calling out for help in Spanish. My family was up, and I assumed it was one of our neighbors, so I went outside. Once I saw the person, I immediately knew something was off. Firstly, this wasn't one of my neighbors, and secondly, the person's clothes were ripped, and they didn't have shoes on. Turns out, the person was a she. I thought it was a young boy at first, and she only spoke Spanish. I tried communicating with my basic Spanish skills to no avail. Eventually, I went inside to ask my parents for help. We ended up calling my uncle, who was fluent in Spanish. He helped translate, and told us that she said she was being human trafficked from Honduras, and that she needed help. She wanted either $500 or a car to LA. We couldn't give either, and offered to call the police, but she seemed adamant that the police didn't get involved. After this bombshell, my family went inside and decided to just call the police anyway. After making this decision, I wanted to check up on her at least. But as my mum and I were walking outside, we saw a car with no headlights pull onto our street. We immediately noped back inside. Once we felt like the coast was clear, we went back out, and the lady was gone. We called the cops and filed a report, but we never heard anything more. To this day, I don't know if this was some sort of scam, or if the girl really didn't know that the cops would help her, and that she didn't know where else to turn. Number 5. I had a neighbor who was a corrections officer at a juvenile prison in my city. There was a new kid at the prison one day. He was apparently very shy and very quiet. He had the misfortune of sharing a cell with one of the most violent inmates. His second night there, his cellmate unscrewed a screw from a bench and sat on his bed in the middle of the night. When he woke up, he said, "I'm gonna make you a pirate," and shoved the screw into the new kid's eye. My neighbor was the first corrections officer to respond to the kid's calls for help. When asked why he shoved the screw into the kid's eye, he claimed that he looked at him in the wrong way. That's a pretty fucked up situation if you ask me, and not one I'd like to deal with under any circumstances. Number 6. When my brother and I were around 4 or 5, we lived in a house that was about 100 years old. One day, we were walking up the stairs when we saw a tall man in a black coat and a top hat walk into the living room, which was to the left of the bottom of the stairs. A little freaked out, we thought our dad was pranking us, so called out for him. Shit. Both parents came out from the kitchen, on the opposite side of the stairs and isolated from the living room. I hadn't thought about it for a long time, and we never spoke about it. Then, about a month ago, my daughter asked if I believed in ghosts, so I told her this story. Literally seconds later, my phone bleeps. It was my brother saying, "I was just talking to my partner about paranormal shit. Do you remember the guy in the top hat?" Number 7. My friend was visiting family in the States. They lived in a rural community in Maine, and one morning she woke up before everyone else and decided to go for a run. After around 30 minutes, she turned back and started noticing a van following a few blocks behind her. She thought it was strange, so she started turning down a few streets, with the van following every move. She started sprinting, and the van sped up too. She ran to the first house she could find and started banging on the door. No answer. She hopped the fence and started banging on the back door. The dog in the house started barking at her, but still no one answered. She jumped into the empty pool in the backyard and hid while dialing 911. She could hear that the van had parked in front of the house, and a man started calling out to her, offering her a ride home. The dog in the house was now barking like crazy, and the man left after about a minute. Police showed up and took her back to her family's place. She gave a report, and they identified the van from a nearby HVAC business. It had been stolen earlier that day, and the same man was arrested in the next county at a gas station. Number 8. This happened to my father. I'll tell the story the way he told me. I was 22 years old. I had just gotten a place closer to my new job, but the neighborhood I lived in was secluded. Maybe 4 houses within a mile. Nothing for miles after that. I was having a normal night, maybe my first week there. I watched some TV and fell asleep. When I woke up around 1 a.m., I was about to go to my bedroom when I remembered to turn off the bathroom light at the opposite end of the house. As I was walking through the living room, I could barely see through to the kitchen, and even farther, the dining room. It was pitch black because the bathroom door was closed. In the dining room, however, I saw something tall standing up in the corner. I froze, and as my eyes adjusted, I saw it was an old man or woman in a white gown with white hair. "Hey," I yelled. The old person sprinted towards me like a fucking jet. I sprinted back to my room where the light was on. I put my hands up, ready to fight, and the old person came lunging in, and when they saw me, they stopped and said, "Why are you in my house?" I pretended I was leaving, and apologized while I eased into the closer bathroom, locking the door behind me and calling 911 with the house phone. Turns out, a woman about half a mile away in the neighborhood had a form of dementia and wandered into my house while I was sleeping. Hey guys, Lazy here, and thank you very much for listening. Firstly, I want to say a big thank you for everyone who's helped me reach 1 million subscribers. 1 million? Half a million. Fuck. Getting ahead of myself. Maybe one day we'll get that far. Hey guys, Lazy here. Well, that upcoming video is taking a little longer than I planned to make, so I figured it would be nice to put out a compilation of my favorite stories from the past few months, since I can piece these things together in a flash. And hey, maybe there's a few you missed. I guess this one's more for the people who fall asleep listening to the stories, or just like to relax with them on. Anyway, enough blabbering. Enjoy the video, and remember, the best things happen in the dark. Many years ago now, I lived in Florida with my then fiancée, Claire. She was my high school sweetheart and the love of my life. A small, petite little thing who couldn't scare a mouse even if she wanted to. Not that she would. She's got a heart of gold. Money was tight for us back then, and I worked night shifts at a gas station to help ease our financial woes. It goes without saying that I hated the hours, but it paid decently. And at a time when I'd have sold my left nut to eat a nice meal at a restaurant, rather than have another microwave meal, who was I to complain? It was while working there that I met Angela, a customer who I became friendly with over the course of a couple of weeks. She was a decently attractive girl, a few years my senior and a bit overweight, but she appeared to be a normal, funny person. That's the thing with people who plan on screwing up your life. They don't come to you as a mindless crazy. Those people you know not to interact with. But because of how ordinary Angela appeared to be, I started chatting with her every time she came into the store. In hindsight, it was a little strange that this woman would come to the store every night and spend a good long while just chatting with me. Most times not even buying anything. But the night shifts were dull, and I guess I welcomed the company. She had always come in at those weird hours because of her insomnia. She refused to take sleeping pills or anything like that because she hated the idea of taking drugs. Funny, the more and more she came into the store, the more I started to realize that she probably wasn't taking some other types of drugs that she should be. After a while, cracks started to appear. I don't know whether she felt comfortable enough around me to let out her real self, or she just couldn't contain that level of crazy any longer. It was the way she acted, and the strange things she said. Like how she had bet that my blood smelled really nice. Sorry, I just told you about my fiancé. Her face didn't change. Like that wasn't blurts out. I'll give you $200. I'd been out by myself walking our dog, Albert, and was on my way back home, since my parents were coming over to our place for a late lunch. When I arrive back home, Claire fills me in on something. Apparently, some woman had come to the door and was asking to talk to me. Said that she was one of my co-workers. She also greeted my fiancée as Phoebe. Shit, Angela's found where I live. I explained to Claire who this nutjob was, and that she was obsessed with me. Thankfully, she knew me well enough to know that I wasn't having an affair behind her back. Being the trusting person she was, Claire invited Angela in, telling her I'd be back soon. She followed her inside to wait for me. Thankfully, my parents and a couple of family friends were already there. At one point, whilst waiting for me to get back, Claire went to use the bathroom. When she came back down, Angela had gone. Just walked out without saying a word, according to the others. I hated the fact that Angela knew where I lived, and that she'd been stalking me. I considered calling the police, but stupidly, I decided to think it over instead. The rest of the afternoon was uneventful, and went by far too quickly. My shift was starting soon, and I was dreading the inevitable return of Angela, back with a vengeance. Claire was already in bed when it came time for me to leave. Just as I was getting ready to head out, I noticed Albert was sniffing at one of the small closet doors, scratching at it and whimpering. Great, we've got rats, I assumed. Come on, Albert, let's take a look then. I opened the closet, and there was Angela, crouched down in the small space under the stairs. Her eyes were wild. One of her hands was clasped over her mouth to hush her breathing. In the other, she held a small knife. You bet your ass that I didn't hesitate to call the police now. Thankfully, she dropped the knife pretty much instantly, and didn't put up much resistance, just bad-mouthing my fiancée, calling her an ugly whore, and begging me to give her a shot instead, as if saying all this would make the situation better for her in some way. The cops arrived, and took her away with little trouble, Claire in tears at the whole situation, me shaking due to a mixture of rage, fear, and confusion. Angela admitted to everything. According to her confession, she knew that I was out of the house when she knocked on the door. That was her plan all along. She hadn't come to talk to me. She came to murder my fiancé. She had brought that concealed knife with her to do so. In her mind, with Claire out of the picture, I'd be all hers, and we'd run away together. What she didn't know was that my parents and our family friends were there too. She followed me in her car to make sure I'd be gone long enough, during which time our guests arrived. When she saw them inside, she knew that she'd have to wait. When Claire went to the bathroom, Angela left the room with my parents in. But she didn't walk out the front door as everyone assumed. Instead, she quietly stowed herself away in that small closet, waiting for the others to leave. She knew my shifts like the back of her hand, so when I returned to the house, she figured she'd wait until I went to work. That way the house would be nice and empty, and at that point she'd be able to murder my fiancé.